New York City is one of the largest cities in the United States and one of the most important and influential. The city is the financial capital of the United States. Trillions of dollars move through Wall Street in Lower Manhattan alone. The New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ call it home. But the city is not just business, it's culture, influence, and power. And that's why the policies shaping the city matter more than most people realize. Zohran Mamdani, a democratic socialist and the first Muslim mayor of the city. Some call him a champion for working-class New Yorkers. Others say his policies threaten the city's economic backbone. Is Zohran actually bad for New York? Let's first talk about who Zohran is. He was born in Kampala, Uganda, however raised in Queens, New York City, after his family immigrated to the US. He graduated from Bowdoin College in Maine, where he studied Africana studies and was involved in political organizing, making his way up in politics through activist work, not corporate backing. Specifically, he worked on community campaigns advocating for tenants and a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. In 2020, Mamdani ran for the New York State Assembly representing parts of Queens. He won without backing of large donors and stuck to grassroots organizing. He knocked doors block by block and defeated a 5-term incumbent. Understanding his background gives us an idea of what his policies aim to do and a clearer image of what he is fighting for. And in 2025, he started to do just that.
He is the latest and the youngest now to challenge Mayor Eric Adams.
Officially, he was running for mayor of New York City. In New York City, small policy changes don't stay small. A shift in rent can affect millions, and a shift in the tax policy can move billions. Once these shifts happen, they can be hard to reverse. Will the consequences of his agenda strengthen or strain the city? New York has one of the highest rent burdens in the country. Millions of residents spend over 30% and even 50% of their income.
Let's talk about the housing crisis.
Housing is a core foundation of Mamdani's platform. He supports expanding tenant protection, stronger eviction limits, and broader rent stabilization. Or supporters of his policy argue New Yorkers' wallets are hurting, and the city needs to do something about the high rent and that landlords and developers are prioritized over tenants. Critics argue when regulation tightens, developers will build less, and less construction means less supply, which would increase the rent even more. In reality, if Mamdani were to provide strong incentives to build new housing and supply expansion, the city could realistically decrease prices by building more housing. In theory, there needs to be more supply than demand. New York City runs on a narrow tax base. A relatively small percentage of high earners contribute a large share of income tax revenue. Wall Street bonuses, financial sector profits, corporate headquarters, that money funds everything from transit to sanitation. Mamdani campaigned on raising taxes on the wealthy. The argument was simple. The city has immense wealth. That wealth should fund public investment. Supporters say it's fair. Critics say it's risky because high earners are mobile. Unlike buildings, they can move. And now, barely a month into his term, the administration is facing what's being described as a multi-billion-dollar budget gap, around $5 billion. That changes the conversation. When revenue projections fall short, there are only a few options. Cut spending, use reserve funds, raise taxes, or some combination of all three. And here's where the tension rises. During the campaign, Mamdani emphasized protecting middle-income New Yorkers from new tax burdens. But if high-earner tax increases don't close the gap and reserves are limited, pressure shifts. Could middle-income taxes rise? Could services be cut? None of these are abstract questions anymore. They're immediate. If tax increases are moderate, phased in carefully, and paired with visible improvements in services and safety, high earners may tolerate them. New York still offers unmatched economic density, culture, and opportunity. But if tax hikes coincide with service strain, crime concerns, or declining quality of life, the calculus changes. Finance responds to incentives. confidence matters. But the margin for error is thin. Mamdani has consistently supported expanded public investment. More funding for transit, more funding for housing, more funding for social programs. The philosophy is clear. Government should play a larger role in correcting inequality. Supporters argue decades of underinvestment left infrastructure strained. They say spending now prevents decline later. Critics don't always oppose spending itself. They question efficiency. New York already spends heavily. The question becomes, does more money automatically mean better outcomes? And with a looming deficit, that question becomes sharper. If revenue tightens, every expansion has to be justified. Transit upgrades take years. One of Zohran Mamdani's most attention-grabbing proposals centers around transit, specifically making New York City buses free and expanding investment in the subway system. The argument is simple. Public transportation is essential infrastructure. If millions rely on it to work, study, and live, cost becomes a barrier. Remove the fare, increase access, boost mobility. Mamdani has supported eliminating bus fares across the city. Supporters argue this would increase ridership, reduce fare evasion conflicts, speed up boarding times, and help low-income commuters. In theory, it sounds straightforward. But transit systems don't operate on theory. They operate on budgets. Bus fares generate hundreds of millions in annual revenue. Remove that revenue, and it has to be replaced through taxes, reallocated funds, or state-level support. Beyond buses, Mamdani has also pushed for expanded public investment in the subway system. More funding for repairs, more service, more long-term infrastructure upgrades. On paper, investment in transit often produces economic return. Efficient cities move faster, and faster cities generate productivity. But the MTA already operates under financial strain. Pandemic ridership declines, capital project overruns, maintenance backlogs. The system is not starting from a position of surplus. The funding mechanism for these proposals ties back to its broader fiscal philosophy. Higher taxes on wealthy residents and corporations. The idea is redistribution, shifting cost from riders to high earners. In theory, that bridges the gap. But transit funding isn't a one-time expense. It's recurring and growing. Here's where friction emerges. New York's tax base is heavily concentrated among high earners. A relatively small percentage of residents contribute a large portion of income tax revenue. When taxes rise too aggressively, especially in a high-cost city, high-income individuals have more flexibility to relocate than lower-income residents. Many can move to states with no state income tax while maintaining business operations remotely. If even a modest share of top earners leave, the city doesn't just lose their income taxes. It loses property taxes, local spending, investment capital, and business activity tied to them. That creates a multiplier effect. Because the tax base is concentrated, losing a small number of high contributors can create a disproportionately large revenue gap. And when revenue drops unexpectedly, the burden often shifts, either through spending cuts, higher taxes on the middle class, or deeper borrowing. Free transit doesn't eliminate costs, it shifts them. Without structural reform at the MTA, procurement costs, overtime spending, capital inefficiencies, increasing funding alone may not solve operational weaknesses. So, could this actually work without damaging the city? Possibly, but only under tight conditions. Revenue would need to remain stable, tax increases would need to stay within a range that does not meaningfully alter relocation incentives. Administrative reform would need to accompany spending. Ridership growth would need to justify long-term operating costs, and broader fiscal pressures would need to remain contained. In a surplus environment, this proposal carries less risk. In a deficit environment, the margin for error narrows significantly. Free buses are politically attractive. Expanded subway funding is economically defensible. but funding both through aggressive taxation in a city with a highly concentrated tax base creates structural vulnerability slowly. If funding is paired with administrative reform, measurable benchmarks, and disciplined budgeting, public investment can generate long-term returns. But if spending rises without structural efficiency, deficits widen. In a city already balancing massive obligations, missteps compound quickly. 1 month into his term, Zohran Mamdani is facing the reality every reform-minded candidate eventually confronts. Ideals meet arithmetic. A city like New York doesn't bend easily. It resists sudden shifts. Its tax base is concentrated. Its housing market is constrained. Its budget math is unforgiving. Here's the honest assessment. Stabilizing tenants, investing in public services, asking more from the wealthy are not inherently reckless. In fact, in isolation, many of them are defensible. But in combination and under fiscal strain, they become high risk. The margin for error in New York is thin. If revenue projections miss, if high earners respond negatively, if housing supply doesn't expand alongside regulation, the city feels it quickly. That doesn't mean his agenda is doomed. It means execution must be disciplined, moderate, and adaptive. My view, Mamdani is not bad for New York by definition, but his governing philosophy leaves very little room for miscalculation, especially in a deficit environment. If he tempers policy with pragmatism, pairs regulation with supply growth, and prioritizes fiscal stability alongside reform, his administration could strengthen the city's social foundation. If not, if ideology outpaces adjustment, the economic strain will surface before the benefits do. In a city built on confidence and capital flow, perception matters. The next few budget cycles will determine whether this is a recalibration or a stress test.